If you are out on your bike or just outside at all today, it's going to be a scorcher. We are looking at, with the Humidex, a high of 32. UV going to be very high. The city expecting that as temperatures rise and continue to rise, that we will see health risks also rise. Heat kills about 120 people a year in Toronto. James Nolan is the Executive Director of Toronto's Environment and Climate and Forestry Division and joins us on the line now. James, good day.
Good day.
What's the strategy to manage extreme events?
So at the city, we've kind of got a two-part strategy. So we've got a long-term strategy led by my team, which looks at climate and how climate's going to change, and then where our vulnerabilities, where our risks are, and how we kind of respond to that. So that's looking out into the future. But we also know that we're getting more extreme days of heat now, and consecutive extreme days of heat in particular. So we have a heat relief strategy that we update every year, and that's really when we get into a heat event any summer, including if it happens this summer. How do we respond at that time? How do we coordinate all the different city divisions and agencies in terms of responding to the impacts of that event?
Now, in some other cities, that job of coordinating between the different divisions comes down to what's called a chief heat officer. Toronto doesn't have one of those. Would there be value in helping streamline the city's response to have a single person through which everything goes?
I think right now we haven't determined if that's the best model for responding to heat. We have other climate risks as well that we've experienced, in the city kind of recently. Flooding, for example, where we've seen extreme precipitation, some large winter storms that are happening kind of on a more frequent basis. But right now, part of the work we're doing is looking at the governance, figuring out what's the best response, how are we coordinating, and how do we ensure that we're able to respond. But as it stands, we do have our emergency management division who does take that coordinated response when we have an event. So we do have a group and they'll appoint an individual. So if we do have a heat event, there is coordination across the city to be able to respond to that. And that follows the plan and the work that we've done to kind of make sure we're ready for a heat event.
Just that person doesn't necessarily have the title chief heat officer or heat czar or something like that.
That's right.
Yeah. Let me ask you, just to get to specifics, because we know modeling suggests to us there's going to be more and more extreme heat events, not just this year, but in the years to come, temperatures pushing above 30 degrees. What is when you talk about the long-term plan, what are some of the specifics there?
Well, one of the things that we recently released, and it's actually the end of last year, was future projections. So we actually updated where we think those long-term trends are going as it relates to heat as well as precipitation. And when it comes to heat, towards the end of the century, we're getting about average of 10 days above 30 degrees Celsius. By 2050, we're looking somewhere between 26 and 44. So, 3 to 4 times as many days. And so then it's starting to think about, well, if we start to see that many days, lots of consecutive days, where are biggest risks? Who are the vulnerable populations? What do we need to do? As well as thinking about how we might change some of our infrastructure to respond. So it could be at the same time we're looking at reducing greenhouse gases from buildings. How are we also ensuring they have cooling built into them, retrofitting existing buildings? How are we ensuring that our emergency services are ready for potentially longer and more extreme days of heat and they're able to continue to respond and we're not seeing pressures in the system? So it's about kind of identifying that risk and then where are we vulnerable, and then taking kind of earlier actions to mitigate against that happening.
James Nolan, thanks very much for your time. That is James Nolan, who's with the City of Toronto. We're going to turn now to Caroline Metz, who's the Managing Director of the Intact Centre on Climate Adaptation at the University of Waterloo. Caroline, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Tell me, because you've done quite a bit of research on different cities and how they respond, how does Toronto stack up?
Well, I think Toronto's doing a pretty good job in terms of mitigating and managing heat risk. We are seeing globally that in terms of chief heat officers, that many cities have appointed chief heat officers, including Miami and Phoenix, Athens, Melbourne, Australia, Santiago, Chile. And globally, it's considered a best practice approach to managing heat, because as our climate continues to warm and we continue to see longer and hotter and more frequent heat waves globally and in Toronto, we're going to have more health and social consequences. So Mitigating heat is a year-round activity. It can include things like tree planting or leading education programs, working with community partners, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So having that kind of coordinated response in the city for heat is something that has a lot of value and should be considered seriously.
What are the things that happen in a city that can exacerbate heat? I mean, I think about parking lots, for instance, just a whole lot of concrete, but the whole city's a whole lot of concrete.
It is, yeah. Toronto's a very large metropolitan area. It's highly developed and it's prone to accumulating urban heat. And it's because of the way we've developed Toronto as well as other cities. We have a lot of concrete and asphalt surfaces, and these materials are really terrible for heat. They absorb heat during the day and then they radiate it during the evening and the night. We also have waste heat that's produced in the city from transportation or from human activity. And generally, we have relatively few trees and water features, which provide a cooling effect and offset the heat if they're present. So, in effect, the city is a hotspot for warming.
You know, when I was listening to James Nolan from the City of Toronto, he essentially described a system where across divisions they are focused on heat, but there's not a single person, not this sort of heat czar or whatever. Where is the value in having a single person, and how much of that ends up just being almost like a PR initiative to say we're doing something?
Well, I think that the benefit in having a chief heat officer or having a heat office, which is a group of people or some role which oversees, is really to coordinate that action and oversee all of the different departments that have a hand in managing heat risk that are being led across the city. So it really means better efficiency. You can be more effective. And also with funding constraints that many cities have, it calls into question that effective nature or the efficiency, and that means saving money in the long run, on top of saving lives and protecting health.
Understood. Caroline, appreciate your time this morning. Thank you.
You're welcome.
That's Caroline Metz, who is the Managing Director of the Intact Centre on Climate Adaptation at the University of Waterloo.